So I did another one of these today where I had slides, and that's the OBS setup that I have now. And so you get me in the corner. I don't care. There's no slides for this one. This is kind of an addendum. It's a thought that I've had in my mind for a little while, and I'm gonna leave my OBS settings. You can see my lovely desktop. I'm on old GNOME. You can tell because there's no hexagons. I've had this idea in my head for a little while that I apologize if you can hear the dishwasher, by the way, upstairs. It's nighttime. That's why I'm not in my pajamas. It's the end of the day. I've had this idea in my head for a while, that I feel I'm living in two different worlds. And I think my Guadec keynote from last year, I tried to capture some of this idea. At the time, it was kind of like this sort of half-joking notion of two gnomes, your forest gnomes and your doozers, like kind of your scrappy anarchist, don't care about branding, don't care about products, kind of the bizarre type of folks that would pronounce it gnome. And then doozers, they're more future focused, they're more brand focused, they're more product focused, they care about vertical integration more. And the forest gnomes, they're green, and the doozers are black. And the joke is that these are two ends of a new political spectrum that goes up and down instead of left and right. So it's funny, elsewhere I feel I'm living in these two worlds between folks who are polarized into two ends of the spectrum, and around AI and LLMs. Not only in the coding world, but particularly in the coding world, or the tech world, at least, because there's a whole thing around operations and review and security and even just documentation and jazz. And the forest gnomes, not necessarily GNOME developers, right? Although there are some, there are folks who are so vehemently and violently anti-AI that they just automatically shut down the conversation. And I don't think there's anything wrong with being anti-LLM, right? They have problems. Understanding what you're fighting against is probably a good idea. And a lot of these folks are drawing their conclusions from, 2-year-old data and examples, free models running something on their laptop. And that's a world that I was kind of steeped in for, I don't know, a year and a half, as this stuff initially started to take off. And I went out today, that's my paper cup, of cold Cold tea. Um, and then there's the other side of this. So that's an extreme, right? And there fewer and fewer people are subscribing to the extreme, but um, on the other end of the spectrum is this other really weird extreme, where people, and this was, I was commenting on this and alluding to this in the previous video that I did today, that people really, some people really seem to believe that the industry is experiencing an upheaval that will lead to a complete restructuring of how software is delivered, and that the restructuring needs to happen now sooner than later, and you need to reconfigure everything that you know about software development to make space for that, even though you don't know where you're going. Which is a bit like you have the legs to run, but you don't have the eyes to see, so you're kind of racing off madly in some direction. And so I see these different variations on this theme, and it all kind of comes in like a mishmash depending on what people previously believed. So I saw one today that's very like mob focused, like mobbing, where you get different roles in your team or teams like involved, and kicking things off together. The documentation was also really describing like pull queues as though that was a new concept. They're like, you get rid of sprints and you do bolts. It's like you don't need a new term for it. We had the term pull queues already. You just pull the work items off the pull queue, and then you do them, and then they go to production, and then you do the next one, right? Like that concept has existed for 20 years. Go read some Etsy blog posts. I don't know. Etsy does pull queues, but they were infamous for continuous deployment long before anybody else was, I think. And then there's this kind of like focus on domain-driven design. I think from like the original definition of that, not like event sourcing, because at some point in the last, I don't know, 5 or 6 years, like domain-driven design, somehow that whole category of stuff stopped meaning like value objects for money, and it started meaning event sourcing. I don't know why. Kafka got really popular. This was like every organization realized that they were backing everything with Kafka instead of a database, and then they're like, event sourcing. That's what we mean by domain-driven design now, for some reason. Events are good, but so are states. You know, there are different ways of modeling data, and that whole thing was a bit odd to me, even though I was deeply embedded in it with 2 different immutable database startups and wrestling with like rotating events into states, or like materializing events into as of now, right? And having temporal queries and junk like that. That was my life for a while. I get it, but I don't think it's like I don't think it's the end-all be-all of domain-driven design necessarily. And I actually think that the AI DLC, as in like SDLC, but like AI SDLC, that I've seen bandied about, I think they mean domain-driven design. I didn't read that closely, I'll be honest. I think they mean domain-driven design in the traditional sense, actually, which is interesting. I could be wrong. But I there seems to be this, like, on that end of the spectrum, there's this whole belief structure that, like, the robots are going to grind it out. And wow, they're not. They're really not. Like, you're not going to hand off your software development processes to robots. You're just not. You're going to hand over more and more mundane tasks, I think. But there's this there's this fire and fury hype on that side, that is, it's really unreasonable. And the whole spectrum between the people who've drunk every last drop of Kool-Aid all the way through to the people who've never touched it before. There's this existential fear that I see in a lot of developers about, like, oh no, what is the industry going to be? And there will be bad stuff's going to happen, and there will be catastrophes for sure. But I think that the notion that we will see an upheaval, right? This is certainly it's a watershed moment. It's a tipping point. It's a turning point, however you want to describe it. 2026 is probably, it's the, you know, it will probably be pointed to as the inflection point, because I think the crash is coming this year. Fingers crossed. I don't know. The crash feels imminent, right? As these companies start jacking up prices, even if invisibly. Chinese models are not 6 months behind anymore. They're catching up. People are moving over to them because good enough. People are feeling the human limits of grinding work out through these things. The psychology of the whole thing is that people are burnt out, and they're understanding. People who participate, not necessarily the most extreme, but people who are engaged with this stuff, which is the majority of the industry, I would say. A lot of those folks are beginning to understand the psychological burden of doing work in this way. And that's a human limitation that you're not going to get around with better token prediction machines or statistics. I don't think you will have a human bound to the task of designing technology for other humans. And that's probably a good thing. And so this is the other world is just, like, embroiled in this. And I'm one of these folks who's stuck between these two worlds. I see them both. They're both there. And they're all the folks in between. I don't quite know what to make of it, but I do kind of feel that there is a sort of collapse toward the center, that the people who've been engaged with this stuff for a really long time are beginning to sort of dial back some of their initial expectations. They're beginning to own some of the code that these systems have produced for a longer period of time, and beginning to understand what they cost, because they do cost you something. Cost you something about the understanding of the architecture, or cost you something in terms of just your sanity and cognitive load. And I'm hearing fewer and fewer like full on the vitriol and the kind of like, if you touch this, like it is poison and you are poison and you should die in a fire. Like that kind of rhetoric is, maybe it's just moved somewhere else, but I don't hear it as much. I think that plenty of people still hate LLMs and hate what they represent, in terms of stealing people's work and plagiarism and the ecological impacts and everything else. Fair, valid. As people move toward the center, I think there's a sort of wholesome thing here in the center where you can pad your expectations of these tools with realism backed up by experience, and you can structure your use of the tools around fundamentals. And so this is kind of like a lo-fi computer collective, lo-fi computing collective idea. Is the sort of like, lo-fi is a little bit of a play on local first, but it's also a bit of a play on low fidelity, that the software that you put into production and support and do operations on, monitor, maintain, observe, keep running, that simplicity is still a virtue. And a lot of what we do as human beings is already sufficiently complex, excessively complex, and we don't really have any reason to indulge unnecessary complexity. And so the thing that you want to get out of LLM usage in software development is not to grind out more garbage faster. The thing that you want is to use the LLMs to harden the stuff that you work on. Security, it might be deeper and more exhaustive code reviews, because frankly they are good at that. They will catch mistakes that you make. And managing extra deployment targets and managing some of the faff, that goes with putting software in production. If you're just writing one library, or you're just writing one service, or you're just making one web app backed at a single URL, sure, it's not that hard. But if you're pushing things out to the web, 3 desktop operating systems, browser plugins, TVs, watches, mobile phones, it's a pain in the ass to release software, because there are so many places that it needs to go, and there are reasons that people choose something like Electron and have chosen things like Electron. And for a long time, that was a good, I don't want to say good choice, but it was actually a choice that weirdly made the Linux desktop like possible, realistic, like that you can run Spotify and Slack and Discord like And I mean, frankly, Teams, right? Because Teams is just a web app that runs in like an Electron shell, as far as I can tell, or like Microsoft Weird, web on desktop thing. But you can go to a website and join a Teams call. Maybe that's a bad example, at least as far as Electron apps are concerned. There are plenty of other Electron apps that run on Linux that would never have run on Linux otherwise. Were it natively built, Slack would be Windows and Mac OS only, and we all know that. Or it would have been for a very long time. Maybe they would have a poorly cared for Linux client or something, because it needs to go into software shops. That day and age where you optimize for the like grossest possible middle ground that Electron represents, or that maybe Flutter represents, or React Native or whatever, that you might still choose to use those tools, but you don't have to as much, in part because of the kinds of automation that LLMs can bring to the software delivery process rather than the software development process, which is kind of an interesting thing. And so I think that you don't want to be Slack. Slack was actually a pretty good product early on, first few years that it was out. Like, it was a solid, persistent IRC weird thing with a centralized server, which is annoying, and it's proprietary and it has problems, but like initially the app was actually kind of okay. The phone apps were good. And they just keep iterating and iterating and iterating in ways that are not necessary. The software was done a long time ago. And so the merits of simplicity on the surface, they seem like they're at odds with what LLMs do, and the way that many people use LLMs is at odds with simplicity, building something beautiful, building something that's done, for the value of done that I've mentioned before, which is really just good software. It's never done. You're going to keep polishing it. But that you can get more done with smaller teams now means potentially that we could spend more time in this middle ground, this solid space where we believe in software that's well designed, well architected, designed top to bottom, where design means user support. It's just another thing I harp on. I think that these things can get along. And so, yeah, the two worlds between the forest gnomes and the doozers. The doozers are already using LLMs every day. They just are. And they're experimenting with them, and the forest gnomes are, not willing to spend too much time in that territory yet. And I think it will be useful for those groups to talk. And where the doozers have gone off the rails and have this kind of like, just full-on superstition or psychosis, where they're giving their agents personalities and they're doing very, very silly, religious, childish things, that needs to be burnt out of them with the fire of sensibility, and to refocus on, it's not just the fundamentals like testing and like a clean, simple CI pipeline, or, seams in your architecture. It's fundamentals of design. And I don't think I'm just being overly nostalgic about this. There was a period in kind of like 2005 plus, 2005, 2006, where design was like an obsession of everybody's. Like, do you remember redesigning the boarding pass? Like how everybody did that for a minute. It's like everybody's blog had like a boarding pass redesign, and some of them were really thoughtful and really good, actually. Better information presentation, better internationalization, better accessibility, better readability, better layout. Because boarding passes are stupid. They're awful. They're designed for the airlines. They're not designed for the people who actually have to use them. That was just this kind of like moment, right? But there was this period where people were really obsessing about design and the simplicity of things and getting to less. Like, how could you do more with less? Pushing the complexity away from the end consumer, the user, like building something pretty and simple and direct, and obsessing about that, because it's really hard to do. It's much easier to give someone 500 different fields and let them mutate everything than to like create proper workflows and simplify things down to, the sort of don't make me think category of UI design where things flow and workflows and systems thinking are intrinsic in everything that you design. It's hard. And it takes iteration, and it takes kind of an unreasonable determination to make things genuinely good. I think we can get back there. And I don't, this may sound heretical, but I feel like LLMs are potentially a way to spend more time there, to spend more time iterating on the basics and the fundamentals of design, of supporting your users. That's the thing that I would like to see. I need to hear about another agentic workflow or some bullshit. I'm like, wow, no thanks. I'm glad people are playing with it. Good for them, but I just can't be arsed. I think that there's like a boil it down to its essence kind of simplicity. I know an ex-coworker of mine leads a team, and last I heard, he organizes the team with a markdown file, right? I'm sure it's different now. This was years ago. But this is a super high functioning team in finance, building massive non-trivial systems, and they didn't need a project manager with a spreadsheet. They didn't need Jira. They didn't need GitHub issues, right? Markdown file, we talk about it, then we do the work. I think that's an extreme case, but there it is a case to be made for using and seeing LLMs in the same way, that like the tool doesn't need to be, I mean, the way that everybody who's using the tools these days seems to be using, most people seem to be like doing the like pimp my ride Emacs Vim customization thing, right? It's not necessary. You can come up with some really simple workflows that work for yourself and it'll be fine. And so I think that is another component of where we're headed with the Lo-Fi Software Collective, Lo-Fi Computer Collective. Maybe it'll just be Lo-Fi Collective. Who knows? Domain name is lofi.mx, so it doesn't mean anything yet. There's nothing there. But capturing the tools and exploiting them for something that like their creators don't necessarily want, I think that would be healthy and positive. I think getting more people involved who are mastered in their particular area, that's a thing that LLMs, I mean, they don't learn, they don't know, so they can't do that stuff. And having people who understand deeply the real like boogeymen inside of the software development process, mutation, time, these kind of state management, resilience, security. Security is a big one, but identity. How about that? Identity is it's a funny one. What is identity in technology? Who is who? These concepts are not going to get any simpler for having involved LLMs in the software development process. They just aren't. It is human ingenuity that creates beautiful, clean, simple abstractions, ideas. TCP, IP, HTTP, like any number of RFCs that you can actually read, the ones you can actually read. We've come up with some pretty good, pretty scalable ideas as a species. And so we can do that again, and LLMs can't. LLMs can kind of help you implement this stuff, but they can't come up with good, simple ideas. And so the Lo-Fi Collective will work on those things. And if there's consulting work to do, which maybe there is, then it will bring mastery to the table. And if there are products that we develop, then they will be developed in an ethical way where ethics spans the licensing, the delivery, the self-hostability, but also the design and the respect for the user's time and their attention and their privacy and everything else. So who knows where that will head, but these two worlds, if you're the sort of person who feels like you're living between these two worlds, I'd reach out. My email is my first name at my last name.ca. and you can ask an LLM who I am, because my name was a Google whack once, and I'm very easy to find. I'm happy to hear from you if you feel similarly. Okay, that's enough for today. Living in two worlds, the green and the black. All right, bye.